1856, Granville T. Woods is born in Columbus, Ohio. 1857, the Dred Scott decision is released. Enslaved people were not citizens, and travel or living in free states did not equate to freedom. 1861, the Civil War breaks out. 1865, the last of Confederate forces surrender. The 13th Amendment prohibiting slavery is ratified. 1866, black codes are passed in states, including Wood's home of Ohio. The KKK is organized in Tennessee. 1868, the 14th Amendment defines citizenship and instills equality among black people and their white counterparts. Reconstruction pushes federal involvement in the South, establishing black legislators and some protections to black people. 1877, Reconstruction ends, and federal troops withdraw from the South. There's less of federal effort in protection of black people. 1881, Jim Crow laws begin to pass, including segregation of state railroads. 1884, Woods is granted his first patent. 1886, the Catholic Tribune comments that Granville T. Woods was one of the greatest inventors of his time. 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson is ruled upon, mandating separate but equal is constitutional. 1910, Woods dies in New York City. For my non-history buffs out there, let me give you a little more context surrounding the inventive life of Granville T. Woods. Woods was pushed out of school at 10 years old because he was a black boy. Woods was not allowed to check out library books because he was a black man. Though Ohio was a free state, it still had crippling black codes. Now be careful to remember, the South was guilty of racism, genocide, millions of abuses against black people, but the North was just as guilty of racism with exploitation and abuse, even enslavement in its history. Now back to Ohio specifics. Black people could not vote, testify in court against whites. They could not hold office or serve in militias. They were required to have a $500 bond to settle in Ohio, in addition to a certificate of freedom. Now remember, $500 back then is a heck of a lot more money than $500 now. Continuing. Black people had to have a certificate for freedom also to get a job. In 1848, they were finally allowed in public schools, but only in segregated schools. Now remember, this is just the written law. It does not account for the other forms of oppression. A black person could be accused of a crime by a white, and more often than not, despite evidence or guilt, the black person faced the consequences. Lynching was one of the most severe and all too common horrifying examples, and it happened in Ohio. Black people were crippled financially in job discrimination. There were no government protections against discrimination. It was very difficult to get someone in office in support of their rights when a black person could not vote. The world told them they were less than, they were insignificant, they were restricted time and time again. But still, they rose. They persisted. One such example is Granville T. Woods. So why call him the Black Edison? Now, I don't know about you, but this rubs me the wrong way, and I'll get to telling you why. You see, his name deserves individual recognition rather than his white comparison. Granville T. Woods was an exceptional individual, but don't confuse him for an unreachable genius. His intelligence, resilience, and developments were original, but he did not have to be an anomaly. Just think of how much potential was, and there still is, in the black community. There easily could have been another Einstein in the 7 million people that our country murdered, not to mention the millions more that have been oppressed in America. But let's get back to our specific example. When Granville T. Woods was pushed out of school for being black, he turned to books to teach himself. But he couldn't afford books due to low pay and job discrimination. But you know what? That's all right. He said, whatever. Of course, I presume in the 1800s speak. He said, whatever. I'll just go to the library. I'll teach myself. No worries. Well, he couldn't check out library books because he was a black man. But you know what? Still, he persisted, like I said before. And he got his white coworkers to check books out for him. Woods was tenacious. He pushed against racism by studying his dreams. He is to be considered one of the greatest inventors of his time. The Catholic Tribune is quoted with this, and while Catholic Tribune sounds unimportant, most of us haven't heard of it, the fact that any public magazine regarded a black inventor as one of the greatest is an important note. Now, I'll get off my soapbox and get into it. The late 1800s were a great time of change in America. Electric lighting was invented and expanding. Electric everything was exploding thanks to popular fascination with harnessing what thought to be God's power, also known as the sublime in many texts. World fairs displayed thousands of bulbs. Streets were lined with arc lamps. People were on the move with railroads. Immigration was on the rise. The West was expanding. There was a lot going on. Inventors were idolized. Thomas Edison created his famous invention laboratory at Menlo Park. Alex Bell invented the telephone. The infamous AC/DC debate ensued. Now, Woods was fascinated, just as the rest of the world was, with this new technology born from electricity. Serving as an apprentice to a machinist also helped too. He took a job as a fireman at a railroad company in Missouri in 1872. He became intrigued by the operation of railroads and transportation. He quickly took work as an engineer, and his knowledge of railroad operations grew exponentially. He moved on to a steel mill, then to be an engineer of a British steamship, eventually promoted to chief engineer. But still, oppression from race could not be shaken. Woods went back to Ohio, this time settling in Cincinnati, and founded his own machine shop in 1880. His first patent was issued in 1884 for his steam boiler furnace. He moved to New York City in 1890 in search of more inventive freedom. Granville T. Woods is responsible for one of the most important inventions of the transportation revolution, the induction telegraph system. Now, technically, this came at the end of the transportation revolution, but it was still very notable. It was actually quite a fiasco. After falling ill for several months, Woods put his work on hold until he read an article crediting Lucius Phelps with his technology. Reinvigorated, he finished his design and took Phelps to court, citing his own sketches and explanations that preceded Phelps's designs by years. Woods won to secure the patent in 1887. Now, I'll try to explain it in layman's terms, his design. So, a large helix and magnet that could conduct a current was suspended from a train, producing a magnetic field. Now, when magnets come into contact with another, they excite. Just think back to when you were young playing with magnets. Some would just stick together. When you flipped them to the other side, you push them together and there was like some resistance. That's the magnetic field. The magnetic field could notify or signal stationary wires that were parallel to the track because they would receive the current from a passing train or no current when there was no train. This allowed trains to be tracked and they knew what was in front of them and behind them. This enabled better prevention of collisions than ever before and an accurate schedule for railroad companies to operate on. Now for visual learners just as myself, here's his patent and explanation. I know this looks alien to most of us, but just follow as best you can. I know not all of us are engineers, myself included. The first figure depicts the apparatus for receiving and transmitting signals in and out of the railcar. The second figure refers to the end of a permanent conductor. The helix is to be connected to the apparatus for the communication of signals. The apparatuses A and A' are the wires that connect the apparatus, which receives and transmits the signals with the helix, represented by C. The helix, again C, is made from coiled soft iron wire and is surrounded by an insulation. Woods insulated the helix so that the magnetic field was better directed. B and B' are the permanent conductors that are placed on the cross ties within and parallel to the railroad tracks. Figure 3 is another diagram of a permanent conductor, explaining that the helix of outgoing and ingoing conductors are directly connected to the apparatus, which again receives and transmits signals. Going back to figure 1 at the top, Woods used circuit breakers and batteries. The battery current is broken into impulse, which affects the magnetic core of helix C, which acts then upon B and B', which conducts signals to the ground wire K. Figure 4 shows the arrangement of the conductors using the end of a railroad car in the track. Figure 5 displays a portable apparatus that was an insurance apparatus, as I call it. It was used in accidents. It too could communicate with other trains and permanent stations. When there was a crash, the switch G would be permanently open, leading to a constant transmission of a signal. Now remember, the circuit breaks communication through impulses, so a constant communication, a constant signal, was understood as something was wrong, such as a crash. The biggest takeaway is that by utilizing magnets, Granville T. Woods was able to create a system that did not rely on direct electrical connection. Direct electrical connection was quite difficult to do in an industry that operated in constant motion. So as you can tell, this was vital to more developments. Other notable patents include the electric railway and electric railway conduit. These designs call for a third rail system, which was more efficient and allowed for the development of underground railroad operations, such as a subway. They were used in Manhattan and Washington, D.C.'s streetcar systems, and today they're still used in subways across the world, including our own iconic New York City subway. Granville T. Woods was vital to art today, and people saw his potential then, but took advantage. He went to court with an ex-coworker, James Zerby of the American Engineering Company, a company that he, Woods, and another founded. Zerby attempted to patent Woods' invention and capitalize on it with the company, pushing Woods out of over $100,000 in the selling of his patents. Woods claimed a specific invention, the electric railway, after seeing his designs come to life in a magazine featuring the system in operation at Coney Island. Woods threatened legal action in the magazine. It was called The Electric Age, but Zerby was quick and sued first. Luckily, it did not pan out as he hoped. Woods was cleared and regained ownership of his designs. Today, Coney Island pays tribute to his inventions, including crediting him with the invention of the first electric roller coaster. Granville T. Woods called roller coasters amusement apparatuses. Therefore, he patented his as the amusement apparatus. He explains, the object of invention is to provide a novel and interesting form of amusement apparatus capable of use at summer and other resorts, at fairs, and more, and in and out of doors. Granville T. Woods became a notable name, not just for the cases, but for his patents alone. He caught the eye of Alexander Graham Bell, the credited inventor of the telephone. Bell bought his patent of the telegraphone, which Woods called the apparatus for transmission of messages by electricity. Woods describes his design, stating, "This invention may be of great advantage in domestic use, as when two students are practicing Morse alphabet, they can speak to one another over the same wire, with the same instruments that were used for telegraphic practice." In other words, did Bell really invent the telephone, or should some credit be given to Woods? Regardless of opinion, this purchase pushed Woods into Thomas Edison's radar, which led to another series of, we'll call interesting events. Edison sued Woods over the telegraphone, claiming it was he that had invented the design prior to Woods, which he called the multiplex telegraph. Won, not just once, but twice in court. In response, Edison offered him a position at his invention laboratory, but Woods declined the offer. Eventually, Edison paid even more when his General Electric company bought Woods' electric railway patent. Later in his life, he continued to sell his patents, leaving his automatic air brake and other electric air brake in the hands of George Westinghouse, the notable inventor of the original air brake. Despite his genius and patents to prove it, Granville T. Woods could not outrun the crippling reality of oppression that the United States culture enforced. Selling his patents only reaped small benefits for the black inventor. He was forced to take side jobs to support his company, one such that only paid $1.20 an hour. Sorry, $1.20 a day, barely enough to live on. At one point, part of his company was even owned by his landlady as a last resort to pay for rent. He was divorced after a year of marriage for being unable to provide and being abusive to his then-wife. Fortunately, people aren't perfect. Even when they're genius, they still have harmful traits just like the rest of us. Still, at the end of his life, he boasted 60 patents, but little in his pockets. There's no debate over Granville T. Woods' ability and resilience. It's sad to know that only recent years have dug up his history. The discrimination of our world, both past and present, knocks hundreds of people down, whether it be from race, gender, ability, sexuality, class, anything. Oppressive systems only hinder our potential, so I leave you with this. Know Granville T. Woods as one of the most tenacious and great geniuses of American history, but remember to relate him to yourself. He was human, you're human, I'm human, we all have potential for such wonder. Thank you.